Thank you. My name is Maureen Kinyanjui. I'm a PhD student at University of Edinburgh, and my research is co-supervised between University of Edinburgh and University of Oxford. I'm looking at, I feel like my presentation is a summary of what Brian McQueen said and the conflict transformation session we had before this. So I'll repeat a lot of stuff. My research is situated in Sagalla ward, which is in Taita Taveta County. Okay, good. And Taita Taveta County is situated between two national parks, Tsavo East and Tsavo West. And according to the national census that we had, only 7.5% of the 100% total landmass of Taita Taveta County is under human settlement. 60% is national parks, and the rest is divided between wildlife ranches, private ranches that have been converted to wildlife sanctuaries, and commercial farming which is focusing on sisal farms and then livestock ranches. And my research is here in Sagalla, and from oral history and written history, what the community tells me is that the community owned the land between the different major hills. So I can't find the right dot, but then between these three hills, it was owned by the community. But then during the colonial times, when the parks were being created, the native communities were relocated, that were living in the park, were relocated to beneath and to live around the hills, and were constrained to between 2 to 5 kilometers squared from the foot of the hill. And fortunately for wildlife, the community is still there, between 2 to 5 kilometers from the foot of the hill, especially in Sagalla. But then it's unfortunate for the community that since the colonial times until now, the population is increasing, but then they cannot move away from the foot of the hill because everything around them is now private ranches and protected areas. So it's important to have this context in mind as I continue with my talk. For my research, I'm using three analytical approaches. I use feminist political ecology to help me understand the concept of power and emotions, the systems theory to understand how the social and ecological components are interacting with each other and feedback into each other and contribute to conflict, and conservation science. I'm using the conservation conflict transformation model that was developed by McQueen and Madden. So this is the model that you saw during the talk with Brian, and he has already talked about this, but I will just emphasize the three different levels. And the first level is the presenting conflict. So for example, when we see elephants appropriating into the farms, that's the evident conflict that we see. And most of the solutions that we are bringing to this is usually technical solutions such as fences and compensation. But then the argument is that most of these human-wildlife conflicts are going beyond the technical solutions, and they're largely driven by social factors. And so my research focuses on the second and third level, and I look at the underlying conflicts, which is the relational level. And Paul John Lederach, who came up with the idea of conflict transformation, says that all conflict come from relationship and then go back to relationship. And we've seen in a lot of research that says that most of the human-wildlife conflict that we're experiencing are not actually conflict between humans and wildlife. It's conflict between the human actors in the conflict. And then the third level is the deep-rooted conflict. That's the structural level. And it focuses on how people build and organize relationship, and these are the psychosocial needs. And specifically for my research, I look at emotions, not the psychological emotions as we understand it, but feminist political ecology talks about emotions that emerge relationally when people interact with each other with more than human elements, what emotions emerge from that interaction and how that fits into how they develop their own sense of identity and how they place themselves in the hierarchy in the structure of, like, for example, in the conservation space, how they place themselves in that conservation space. When I focus on the second level of human-to-human conflict, my argument is that these human-to-human relationships in conservation spaces are power-laden, and they have a lot of conflicts, power and politics that are happening there. So most of the power struggles that are happening there and the politics is revolving around the distribution of costs and benefits and the definition of problems and who comes up with the problem. Who comes up with the solution. So this is a tweet that I got from one of the conservation organizations that works there. And they're saying that one of the biggest conflict, one of the things that is contributing to the conflict is encroachment of humans into elephant territories. But then what the community feel is that when I was working in the field, they kept on saying, I was working there before as a conservationist, and now I removed the hat of a conservationist, and I came back as a PhD student, and they really were just knocking me down every time. They were saying, you're the one who came to my farm and you told me I've encroached. Now that you've understood that all this land belongs to us, and we cannot move from where we are you still going to tell me that I've encroached? Yet my farm was a bit like 5 kilometers from here, but I cannot go there. I'm going much closer towards the hill because elephants are chasing me. And this is the kind of, you can see now the power dynamics that come in and the politics of defining what the problem is and what the solution is, because the solution most of the time is that the community needs to create space for the corridors. But then when you look at the entire context, it seems like, especially, that's why I'm saying, my research is very context specific. And when you look at Taita Taveta County, if the humans are only inhabiting 7.5% of the total land mass, then you start questioning whose knowledge counts in this situation. And the third level, I'm looking at emotions and identity. And I give this example of an elephant underpass that was, I had 24 focus group discussions, and I think in all of them, everyone talked about this incident where community settlement was destroyed because the argument was that the community's presence was interfering with the elephant passing through the corridor. But then when you look at the community, they're saying that even the community has been there even before the construction of the standard gauge railway, and the elephants were passing when it was just this small train. It was just this tracks, yeah. It was just these tracks. And so what they feel is that there's a lot of focus on what the community should be doing, and they're being used as scapegoats to support policies. And unfortunately, their emotions about this is that it's marginalization and oppression. And when I focus on emotions, I want to see how it affects to how they develop their own sense of identity. And a lot of them were telling me in Swahili they're the mnyonge, they're the vulnerable ones, they're the oppressed ones. And they give you this example, which everyone I think in East Africa has heard from when they talk to community members, that when an elephant dies, then there's land cruisers and helicopters. But when an elephant kills a human being, then people come back much later in the evening, and then they just take the body and go away. And how these emotions are passed on from different people. And what Sango Mahonti talks about is like this history of slow violence. And you can see that from the time during colonial times until now, the community is still experiencing this kind of feeling of its slow violence against them, and they keep on being dispossessed of the land. And these kinds of emotions develop this sense of identity where the conservationists are the other, and they're the ones who are oppressing me, and they're the ones who are posing a risk to my identity. I've talked so fast because I have...
Okay.
Okay, so what does it have to do with elephants? And from the beginning until now, you notice that I've not mentioned elephants. It's not like even the community. For me, it was very strange because sometimes when I was asking someone about elephants, they'll tell me that they want to buy a nice dress for their children. And I was trying to make a connection between how does buying a nice dress for your child affect elephant conservation. And I found that it's because of all this changes and these power struggles and how they they want to, like, they're very proud and they want to maintain the sense of identity. This is my land, this is my home, and this is my space. But then and I explore this further in my research, but then here I want to see that all this, the interaction between the humans and the power struggle between them and how the emotions emerge from this struggle is affecting elephants, because elephants are being used as a lightning rod, because to hurt the conservationist. And I watched a play recently called Medea, and at the end of the scene, the lady was saying that she was asking, she wanted to get back at her husband, and then she said, "Do you love your children?" And the husband said, "Yes, I love my children." And she's like, "Okay, now I know how to hurt him." And so she killed her children, even if it hurt her. And I find that that's the same kind of interaction that the community has with the conservationists and also the government practitioners there. And I like this statement because it's one of these ladies who, in this focus group, it was very emotional. And they were giving examples of how they have tried to get their voices heard, but then no one is paying attention to them. And that's why they're saying they're going to be cruel. So, but then the cruel nature is not to the conservationists because they feel powerless. As they say, they're the mnyonge. But then the one that they can hurt is elephants. So I find that I like I'm not sure if I'm trying to force the word resilient into coexistence, but then I like saying resilience in coexistence because we are talking so much about conflict transformation, and resilience involves adaptation and transformation. And I think the communities have tried to adapt so much, but then at one point we need to find out how we can transform. And transformation comes, and I think someone mentioned it in the previous lecture, the previous session we had about listening. So what I've learned now is, in my personal experience, my research, my whole PhD was about improving tolerance for improving the community tolerance and attitudes towards elephants so that it coexists. But then after going to the field and being hammered by all the misdeeds that I did as a conservationist there, I started appreciating the fact that maybe I did not know, even if I lived in the community, I did not know how they feel about my presence. And it made me start questioning about my position and the power that I hold in shaping the narratives that influence policies and interventions. So I think this is one of the things that one of the things that I would like to talk about is, for transformation to happen, we need to shift the power. And a lot of people are talking about transformation, but then we also need to focus on what transformation entails, and that's shifting the power from us giving the narratives, but then also focusing on the lived experiences of the people interacting with the wildlife and letting their perspective feed into the approaches. And also someone else mentioned, I think it was Steve Michael from the Canada National Parks, he said two-eyed seeing. And in feminist political ecology, they talk about different ways of seeing. And our scientific understanding of the conflict is just a partial perspective of understanding the conflict. We need to take the community members as actors and agents in the conservation process, and their knowledge should be at the same level as Western and scientific knowledge, because they're the ones that interact with elephants and they can see them from in the morning, in the evening, all year round when the elephants come. So in conclusion, human-elephant coexistence is an emotional process, and power dynamics and politics underlays relationship between human actors. I think as conservationists, it's time to embrace the uncomfortable truths of there's power dynamics and the politics there. We cannot completely say coexistence is neutral or it's scientific and objective. It's also a power struggle, and it's also very political. And then resilient human-wildlife coexistence requires conflict transformation that promotes power shifting and increasing justice and developing healthy human relationships. So for coexistence to be resilient, the relationship between the different actors needs to be healthy. And the health comes from talking about power and politics and understanding the lived experiences of the people. And yeah, I've forgotten what else I wanted to say. And and I think it goes, I've talked to a lot of people, and it seems like it's when you get that triangle with the different actors healthy, then it doesn't matter what species you put in. It's still about the human communication there. And also what Diego mentioned in one of the classes I attended, the empathy mapping, trying to put yourself in their shoes and see if you can actually live with elephants. And if you cannot, then you need to make a trade-off and have a dialogue about it. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Maureen. Thank you very much. We have time for one quick question.
Thank you. That was a wonderful presentation. I come from Sri Lanka, and we have, I think we share similar things in Sri Lanka and your place. Where in Sri Lanka, 60% of the elephant range, the country is 60% come under elephant range, and 70% of the elephant lives outside protected area with the people. Yeah. So we have around 7,000 elephants in 65,000 square kilometer with the highest density in the world. So the credit should go to the people. But whenever the people are asked for a problem of human-elephant conflict, they immediately say that they cannot live with the elephants, they have a lot of problems. But the same people have been living with the elephants for several years, several generations. But the moment you go and ask them, their behavior changes because they think that they are going to get something and they will be benefited out of that. So do you have this kind of problem there also in the area where you work?
It's a very important statement because when I met the Kenya Wildlife Service senior warden, he told me that I need to find out in my research why when they go to the community, like when they go to a community individual in their farm, when they talk to them, the community is very polite. But when they bring the community members into a boardroom and they talk about human-wildlife conflict, the community members want to beat them up. and that's what I'm trying to investigate in my research because it shows, and this is why I'm talking about the emotional, like how emotions emerge from relationships, and it shows like it's an interaction between emotions and power. So when the community member is in their farm, they are powerful because you're the one who's coming into their farm and they feel they're in control. So that's my argument. That's why the emotions are calm. But then they talk about subjectivity and how they place themselves. So by the time they move from the boardroom, they've experienced very many interactions. And when they come from their farm and when they go into the boardroom, how their subjectivity, how they position themselves in relation to everyone else in the boardroom, they're maybe at the bottom of the hierarchy. And that's why they become very emotional because if they've already perceived that they're very small and people are telling them, you're the poachers, you're the ones who are encroaching, then they have to fight back. And I think that's the same thing. Like we need to explore more how people perceive themselves, how they feel when they're interacting with different people, and the power dynamics that happen between these interactions, because it helps us understand why people behave the way they do in different settings, but on the same topic.
Thanks very much. Wonderful. So that's.